that many of us kind of will be used to now. So banking, insurance, and this type of thing. The only way that Black folk were able to access services, and there's some, exceptions to the rule here, but primarily it was about Black folks cooperating and forming their own institutions and their own organizations to essentially meet their material needs. And the case I want to make here is that at the early emergence of those orgs, you actually had Black folk who had been living in the North, who'd received educations and this type of thing. So, like outliers at that time, given the material conditions of most folks. But actually, at the time, they were going over to the UK and meeting the early pioneers of the cooperative movement. And they were seeing how the ways which people were organizing in ways that were different to corporations, based more around principles of co-ops. So there's 7 main cooperative principles, but you can really reduce it down to the basis that it was an alternate way of organizing that wasn't just purely about maximizing profit. It also took into account the conditions of the people, of all stakeholders. And at that time, in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had leaders from the Black community in the States coming across and saying, these struggles of ours look different, but they share a common root. And that's kind of all the kind of the background kind of context I'd like to set for kind of where we're at now in this moment in time. It might look very different back then, but many of the kind of underlying root things which many of us are trying to figure out how we relate to it. We're talking about inflation, the disparity in the way that depending on where you are from, like structurally treated extremely differently, the effects on your life kind of might look different, but share many of the root causes. And so in this future that we're imagining, Olympus as the reserve currency of the internet, total addressable market of everyone connected to the internet, it's our feeling, in certainly within the grants program and within many sections of the DAO, that to achieve that, you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach across the globe. The way that you get forward, like a mycelial network in the forest, is when mycelium meet like a new old growth forest, it doesn't try and take over. It figures out, okay, how can we interrelate adjacently? How can we kind of, now I'm personifying the mycelial network here, but what I'm trying to say is, it's with the greatest pleasure I now introduce Na from the BlackDAO.
Thank you.
And on the Olympus side, we couldn't be more excited to be partnering with partners who are kind of excelling within their communities, meeting the needs that are kind of specific to the context, both contemporary and historical, that they come from, and figuring out how, as an organization, we can, in the same way that Black leaders from the States went over to England to connect with the cooperative movement, what are some of the shared root problems that we can work on together without having to, on either side, fix all of the same problems? But how can we win and help win? So I've rambled long enough. I'll pass over the mic to you now. Nah, I'd love if you could just give a bit of an intro to yourself, a bit of your crypto story. How did you get into this this sector? Maybe how did that lead you into creating and forming the BlackDAO, and who else is involved and that type of thing?
Of course, yeah. And I appreciate the synopsis there. You know, it was beautifully put. All the history behind, worker and producer owned cooperatives go directly into our sort of philosophy and how we came to build the structure that we're currently building. So really appreciate that. And even the sort of mycelium fungi parallels, it's brilliant to sort of personify the the level of organization that we'll need to solve these collective issues that we're dealing with. And so, we really appreciate the introduction there to give that context. But hello everybody. I'm saying, you can call me Na. I am the founder of the BlackDAO. I have a couple of my team members in the chat here as well. The shout out Zero X Fred, the farmer, Alexis and DeFi. We are an investment DAO creating a decentralized reserve currency protocol and yield aggregator with the purpose of using our treasury assets to fund Black and African-owned businesses, creatives, and initiatives. And one of the things that I do want to emphasize is that, we chose these three categories particularly for the idea of worker, consumer, and producer-owned cooperatives, because these are typically the three categories in which they manifest specifically within Black and African communities. And so, it ties directly into the sort of history of communal economics and collective ownership that we've seen sort of spring up in historically excluded communities. And so one of our biggest aims for our organization is to be the economic backbone of that African diaspora, both on chain and on and off chain, and sort of use Web3 and the technologies that are emerging as an economic development tool to increase and organize our collective purchasing power. And so we began as we began just strictly trying to build that mission. Personally, my personal journey with cryptocurrency, I began, in crypto around 2013. I was studying it as a technology in my undergrad. Jumped into ASIC mining in 2014, sort of right around the time where the bear market around that cycle was just starting to begin. I was getting more confident in the ecosystem, and I really just wanted to learn more about it, and of course, learning about it, having an added bonus of passive income at the time. I think I remember spending maybe 19 Bitcoin on 4 ASIC miners from Bitmain and just mining all throughout 2014 to 2015 during that bear market. At the same time, I was onboarding friends and really studying and growing with the market as well, from an academic and practical standpoint, because I really wanted to get familiar with the technology. We were all around that time and before really enamored. My generation was really enamored with peer-to-peer networks like LimeWire. And so it was a bit of a quick transition for me myself. And, I started to examine the ability for blockchain to fulfill that early promise of alleviating economic deprivation in communities that need it the most. And so, what you're seeing is like a culmination of 7 to 8 years of academic research that we've sort of put into this. And then, our remaining 4 sort of anonymous members have each been involved in crypto since 2015, 2016. And we were just all in college together, learning the space, creating investment clubs, and, just trying to grow throughout the different stages of the boom and bust cycle over the past 10 years. We got a chance to study Masternode and different proof of stake mechanisms. We saw the whole Bitcoin, blockchain, not Bitcoin era, where security tokens were told to be the next big thing, and spent some time working with that space, particularly in the Stellar Lumens community, on economic models for around affordable housing with the Community Land Trust, which, specifically to William's point, was an economic model for affordable housing that was birthed by the Jim Crow era, so the civil rights movement by the King family and Professor Schumacher, based in, his institute based in Berkshire, Massachusetts, and sort of went through studying those economic models and seeing and examining ways to bring that to crypto, DeFi, and Web3. And you know, with that, we've all found our personal individual successes within crypto, of course, but at the same time, we're far from removed from our college days, with a combined 15 to 20 years of experience in corporate finance, marketing, engineering. And so I'd say we're perfectly suited to handle this sort of ambitious project. And, we're just excited to get a chance to execute some of these ambitious ideas. And we'd love to have the community behind us supporting the project in any way they see fit. We looking forward to seeing what contributors pop up for the initiative.
Thanks for that. Now, I wonder, before we jump into some of the specifics of what you all are building and what we're going to work together on the Olympus Grants program, I'm wondering if you could, and feel free to kind of bounce it back to me if this is kind of a from left field question, but when reading into kind of the demographics of adoption of crypto, both globally and in the States. Now, you might hear from my accent, I'm not from North America, so if my read here is kind of off, do feel free to let me know as well. But it strikes me that adoption of crypto technologies, both in the States amongst the African American community, is kind of comparatively more than counterparts such as Hispanic folk, white folk. And then globally, Absolutely. We've got kind of the emergent on the African continent of like kind of an astronomical uptake in crypto compared to kind of neighboring continents. I'm wondering like what's your read on why that is and what's going on there?
Well, I think that is in particular like a relic of the sort of historical disenfranchisement of Black and brown people globally, but also it manifests in that racial wealth gap that we hear so much about. And as it relates to American crypto markets alone, Black Americans are sort of leading the charge with, two recent studies conducted by Harris Poll show that somewhere around 44% of African Americans in America own cryptocurrencies compared to like 11% of white Americans and 17% of Hispanics. And it's primarily, again, that racial wealth gap. And because this is one industry where we haven't been, it's sort of pseudo impossible for us to be locked out of, like traditional industries, like the marijuana industry, the alcohol, and more the things that are more heavily regulated to the point where there are centralized points of entry that could still have sort of racial undertones to lock marginalized communities out of the industry. And so even we can even see that globally. The African country of Nigeria is the global leader in Bitcoin trade, according to the polls that are done by the data platform Statista, found that 32% of Nigerians took part and partly owned cryptocurrencies as an asset, and that's the highest proportion of any country in the world. Even countries that have actually accepted it as legal tender at this moment. So, I think it exposes sort of the institutional relics that still exist to lock marginalized communities out of the traditional finance market. And now we're starting to see, we're beyond the layer one sort of infrastructure era of the ICO boom. And we're actually starting to see applications being built on top of these networks where people can actually access innovative, or not even just innovative, but projects that mirror traditional financial tools that are either inefficient in home countries or traditionally racist institutions. And so I think that leads, that applies context to sort of what we're seeing and the surgence of Black and African communities jumping so wholeheartedly into the Web3 and the crypto space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that read. I mean, just to kind of, I'm a pseudonymous mushroom, but yeah, my family are from the colonies where they were kind of implicated and involved in the um, growing of sugar from like the 1900s onwards. Were moved from kind of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Indian continent through these systems of indenture, which kind of came up post those periods. And I bring this up just because uh, the one of the primary questions. So I myself have been in crypto kind of around the same time as you, maybe a bit before, but I think you went a bit
yeah,
deeper on
yeah.
the academic side of things. I did do. I blew up my laptop doing a kind of writing a data mining algorithm on the Bitcoin blockchain,
Oh wow, yeah,
um,
yeah,
uh, uh, scraping metadata that would indicate the uh, people were using the Bitcoin uh, uh, network as a data storage layer for what I was calling more than economic uses. Because I was trying to identify as like, are people using this as a permanent storage solution, but with systems that aren't just to do with the sending and receiving of these
yeah,
tokens?
yeah.
And kind of from the beginning through this is a bit of a detour, but I think it speaks to this kind of pre-Ethereum and that type of thing. People were really trying to kind of find ways of utilizing this kind of online, always on, tamper proof database.
Exactly.
Um, and until stuff like the Ethereum chain and stuff came along, which is now just, um, uh, more suitable for those type of ends. But to loop
Exactly.
back around to family from colonies is during those years that you mentioned, I myself was living out in the Pacific in Fiji at the time. And I remember I got invited to a talk by kind of like a bunch of the kind of like technology and finance ministers for various states in the region. And they at that time were kind of asking, hey, what's this what's this blockchain thing about? What's actually going on? Um, and I remember at the time, the workshop was pretty simple. I just dug into a few white papers, I pointed people at it. And I was like, but really, I want to show you, I want to just show you. And so I got someone in the room, I think it was like the head of telecommunications for the government of Tonga, quickly spun up a crypto address on the laptop. We're in an ICT room. Um, and
Yeah, yeah.
I sent him some what did I send? It was either ETH or Bitcoin. I think it was ETH. And I was like, okay, so you could have been sat 10 meters away from me, or you could have been sat in Tonga, or you could have been sat in South America, or you could have been sat anywhere on the globe, and it would have arrived at the same time. And there was a bit of quiet, and then someone said out loud, the remittances industry is fucked. Just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
immediately was just like, I got it. And so
yeah,
my family over in South America as well, like there's folks anywhere where there's been like hyperinflation. So folks from like Venezuela, um, they see the kind of, there's great adoption where people kind of have on the ground experience kind of like a material need for these things. And so, yeah, when the BlackDAO kind of came across my plate, I was already primed for seeing the absolute integral necessity for organizations and institutions which are buy-in from community, not from the outside. Because so much of the source of what we're dealing with in these technologies is like don't trust, verify. And I think that comes also to the institutional, organizational, and kind of like people delivering services. Is there's an element of, you know, kind of needing on some level to trust that these systems, one, aren't going to lock you out, but then two, if we're talking about kind of economic advancement, the people
yeah,
behind institutions are buy-in from community, are going to be able to go into places, directions, services and achieve things which organizations which are made up of people from outside of those communities simply won't be able to. And so maybe as a segue, you mentioned the three kind of sectors that you're kind of looking into. Could you maybe dig a bit in there more and add some color, like what does that look like? And then working backwards from the market segments that we're looking into and the stuff that they're doing. Like how is it that you envisage the BlackDAO kind of connecting out to those different sectors? And then maybe we can like then step back to, okay, as part of this grants program, what does that look like from here?
Of course. Yeah, we can. I can definitely jump into that. I do want to first give some context around the sort of formation of the idea in the organization. So the idea sprang from all the chaos that was going on around summer of 2020. I'd hate to bring that time period back up for a lot of people. I know it has some trauma attached, but at the beginning of a global pandemic, the entire country saw the most significant series of uprising for human rights, in our nation's history. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, during this time, the cryptocurrency community was looking towards the rapid growth that was sprung by DeFi summer. The release of Compound's airdrop, Uniswap's airdrop, the release of Yearn Finance, and we saw with these sectors sort of beginning their rapid growth. Thousands, of course, forked projects of Yearn and Uniswap started to hit the market, and their goals and sort of differentiation factors included value propositions that just sort of, innovative economic models make it work better, expand their influence throughout the cryptocurrency space. But, they rarely sort of focused on that sort of early promise of cryptocurrency and blockchain of advancing economic development for historically marginalized and impoverished communities. And so we sort of saw that parallel going on. And as the technology developed, we had insurance, DeFi platforms, launch pads, algorithmic stable coins, no loss lottery. It began to sort of take the form of a lot of the sort of economic experimentation that we've seen throughout the century, try to uplift communities and even developing countries that sort of needed it the most. And we wanted to make that leap to get that funding that was being passed around through Web3 to the communities that needed it the most. And a part of doing that would be, through a number of partnerships that both already existed within DeFi, had interest in onboarding into Web3, and sort of have mechanisms in place to sort of facilitate that leap as well. And so, particularly talking about our investment arm, we're wanting to jump into spaces as far as VC, which is easily managed and facilitated through crypto, through projects like Syndicate DAO, which just released their beta, I believe, and then other sort of Web3 enabled VC firms that still invest in Black and African owned startups, but also keep their reporting and the transparency and their accounting on chain. And then, of course, our network of partners and our deal flow network, including the National Black Chamber of Commerce, HBCU networks, SBA lenders, of course, which frequently cater to marginalized communities, and particularly in that area, one of our goals will be, and in partnership with own grants, promise of and objectives of education and utility, it calls for education of the Web3 space and then onboarding onto Web3 to get access to the funding and the capital necessary. And so that'll most likely happen through platforms like Centrifuge's Tin Lake, Maple Finance, going through their sort of due diligence processes to onboard institutions and businesses that formally cater to marginalized communities. And so that gives the DAO, what that does is get the DAO practical access to funding tools like revenue sharing, micro lending services, bridge loan access to Black and African communities that are, not exactly looking to solve really ambitious projects, but are like mom and pop shops that just need access to capital for a short period of time, or COVID relief efforts for those communities who are, not surprisingly disproportionately affected by the pandemic. 55% of Black business owners said that their business's financial health is at risk or was distressed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's compared to just 27% of white business owners saying the same thing. These are sort of real world problems that crypto, even at the time in 2020, had the technology to come in and solve. But, we're sort of, our focus collectively was elsewhere at the time. And so the BlackDAO actually started to feel, was actually created to fill that gap, to fill that need that was being unmet. At the same time, I gave you the statistics about Black Americans being in particular, being onboarding into the cryptocurrency space. There was a need for education deeper than centralized exchanges, the sort of ICO culture where you bounce from centralized exchange to exchange and sort of are limited to services that are offered by those entities, rather than diving deeper into the DeFi ecosystems that could have potentially saved a lot of businesses during that time. And then additionally, the sort of creative collectives, we've seen, especially since the pandemic and the rise of, applications like we're using now, Spaces, and particularly at that time, Clubhouse, saw a huge explosion in users. And that's sort of where we saw the emergence of Black and African NFT artists who at the moment are, and, since have been sort of thriving in the space. However, the need for them to organize their collective purchasing power has been sort of, I'd say, hindered by the lack of representation and the lack of presence of Black and African focused projects within DeFi, particularly on mainnet. And so, sort of one of the ways to sort of circumvent that is to allow for a creative arm to invest directly into those artists, create a vault of NFT African projects, also do commissioned NFT art for those artists who are looking for both exposure and funding of their continued growth. And then, of course, auction services that not own that is a mutual benefit, actually, because it allows for us to do a similar bonding technique that Ohm sort of pioneered without some of the negative inflationary effects, but also having some of that revenue sharing and that treasury allocation aspects to it as well. And then our philanthropic initiative, which seems to be completely in line with Olympus's Give program, which I understand is undergoing a shift at the moment. One of the things very early on that our organization was looking towards was something that we were calling philanthropic yield farms, where you could donate your yield, but also get sort of, we're onboarding actual nonprofits who are certified, so that you could also benefit from the tax benefits of donating directly to nonprofit organizations off chain, towards their initiatives, and also take advantage of those tax benefits as well. And sort of the structure of Olympus Give sort of gave us the avenue to implement those in a more efficient way as well, while staying true to our mission. And so those are the sort of deeper strategic ways that we're looking to you know, reach our ambitious goals that we've been advertising for a while. That we do have a number of non-binding letters of intent with a lot of the organizations that I mentioned, and the only issue now is going through and executing those once we go through our launch period and have the protocol up and running.
Thanks so much for that. I'm going to ask maybe one more question. I can see a few other folks, contributors to grants, ADA and Eman. If I'll send you out a invite speak, but no pressure. But whilst I'm doing that, Nad, you mentioned, so thank you for kind of bringing in the kind of it's easy to forget sometimes in crypto, like the kind of connected in time seems to move fast, but really 2020 wasn't all that long ago. But on the kind of, you mentioned Yearn, and when you were kind of thinking about the BlackDAO and the gap in the market that it would serve, like what was it that in and around that time about the mechanisms from Olympus that you saw something and you were like, okay, that's a model, like that's going to help us do, what was it about the stuff you were looking at around that time that had you land on kind of some of the Olympus mechanics?
Right. So, around that time, of course, yield aggregators were really in their sort of own contained bull market. We were originally looking to launch a simple yield aggregator that would use the fees to fund a treasury that would then fund our initiatives. Now, in doing that, we wanted to find or structure our tokenomics around proven models that have withstood the test of time and also have retained value for their early investors. That was a really important aspect for us. And so we started looking into particularly a Yearn fork by the name of Curve or cvault.finance. If some of you are familiar with it, we were doing some market analysis and saw that they had sort of withstood the contained mini bear markets that we've seen throughout this bull run, and sort of wanted to take a lot of those principles and themes and apply them to our project. And so that it included things like protocol owned liquidity, permanently locked, revenue generating assets within the treasury, no idle capital at all. And, in developing that, the sort of infrastructure that we were looking to build to get to that level got more complex as we started to build in the controls. It started to include Uniswap v3 and sort of Alchemist's integration of yield bearing NFT assets, which was fairly new at the time still. And it was starting to become more of a technical challenge than we anticipated. And, in studying solutions for that, we ran across Olympus and sort of the structure that Zeus and the core contributors sort of built to handle some of the same issues that we were dealing with. And, found that a lot of our themes, a lot of our objectives were aligning at the time. And so we, as a team, decided to make the pivot and sort of focus on a rebasing currency solution at the same time. Based on those similarities, I think I may have ran across the solution, I want to say around April or May of last year. And then I finally invested around, I want to say index 30, after doing a few months of research there. And then, of course, the 3-3 meme on Twitter, just been exploding on Twitter, was, of course, integral for us to noticing the protocol. But, we sort of were attracted to the tokenomics and how we may innovate those and tweak those to serve our initiatives. And that's how we ended up landing where we are today.
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's I think a common story that when folks come across Olympus, it takes some amount of time to go like, is this real?
Yeah, yeah,
Certainly did for me. It took, I think, 3 months. And then after that period, I was like, okay, I get this. And then since 2014, I've been onboarding folks into crypto. So I kind of went back out to my networks and onboarded about 100 people into ARM around September, October.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think, like, here's the thing. So getting in around that time, we've seen this 90% retracement. So like supporting and walking through kind of everyday people through this stuff and having them be able to diamond hand through a 90% retracement does require this kind of education ticket, this kind of mutual support. There's a high degree of trust
yeah,
there in my networks. Um, but, you know, that's not to say it doesn't get shaky, but certainly kind of had any one of those people who were maybe a bit less experienced been kind of doing it solo, be way more difficult, kind of like mentally taxing, stressful,
exactly.
fraught with like worry around if something's kind of um, legit or not. So it, for Olympus to kind of really break through, I think essentially, and you'll see this as part of a strategy from the grants program, is focusing on projects which can help us from within their own domains, essentially create conditions and connections and the kind of relational frameworks and social fabric that can hold more groups of people through kind of the instabilities that are quite common in the crypto sector, because you know we can only move at the speed of trust is kind of a phrase that I heard kind of ring out of the Black Lives Matter movement, which kind of stuck with me because in crypto stuff can kind of move fast between
Yeah, yeah,
protocols. It's permissionless in this sense, but when it hits the human social layer, it does need to slow down in some instances to kind of like allow people to kind of get up to speed and not be making decisions or things which are going to get them wrecked and that type of thing. But
yeah, yeah.
without further ado, we've got about 10. Now, what do you reckon? Should we open up to the floor? I've invited up a few grants folks, but they don't have to come up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course,
If
of
there's
course.
anyone out there, if you've got a question for Nar or about the grants program, please feel free to um, wave your hand. I'm doing my best to kind of make sure I'm not ignoring anyone. Um, and maybe a bit about the grants program itself. So as I mentioned, we launched on Tuesday. We are authorized by the community through the Olympus Improvement Proposal, the OIP 55, which was ratified, I think, on the 6th of December, late last year, which tasked the grants program with 1.5 million to run a 3.3-month trial, so a 99-day trial, with the express purpose of helping Olympus expand the economy, which we've taken to mean essentially work to activate the ecosystem and to connect with and service and get involved in a wider segment of Web3 and also to break through from Web3. So we've got a particular focus on projects which can help with Olympus utility, infrastructure, and education. And we just launched on Tuesday with a cohort of 13 partners. So this is the second in a series of conversations with folks who are in that Amanita first cohort. We encourage everyone to apply. Check out the website. It's grants.olympusdao.finance. We're really keen to hear from the wider community about things that you think will help in that mission of expanding the economy. That's essentially how can we get more of these DeFi mechanisms, these open finance mechanisms into the hands of people to help solve real problems that people have on the ground. If you've got an idea around that stuff, we'd love to hear from you. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
okay. No one's
I do
requesting to
want
speak.
to say. I do want to say, the grants program has been, integral in sort of the advancement of our platform. It got to the point where we were able to offer each other like mutual benefits. Our devs team linked up and started to sort of offer services back and forth, and it was one of those things where we sort of feel supported beyond the funding of our initiatives and the funding of our project through the grant. But it really feels like a uh, like that sort of parallel that you were drawing with the fungi communities. A network of individuals trying to accomplish one goal and linking their ecosystems up to do that. And just mutually beneficial partnerships. I do recommend the grants program to anyone out there listening and thinking of a project that could help expand the Ohm ecosystem and link into their other sort of ecosystem partners as well. It's been a great help for us in particular. So I just wanted to make that statement.
I appreciate that. And you all don't fuck around. You like jump straight in. You're like wrangling with the backend code. You're like, hey, this seems to be missing. What's going on? And the smart contract devs are like, no, no, it's not. And then it's like, oh, no, you're right, it is. And it's like, oh, can you help us kind of upgrade this? So like, props to you and the team for kind of just like jumping straight into the guts of the thing. And yeah, I think we're just excited to see what we can enable that hasn't been enabled before, that Olympus wouldn't have been able to do by ourselves. That's really kind of at the heart of the 3-3 meme, is like win and help win. And the expansion of these non-zero sum games, so kind of positive sum, not winner takes all thing. And yeah, that's really a lot of the like mycelium in a forest. A lot of the value that Olympus brings is not just the fat treasury; it's the kind of the behind the scenes within the DAO. That you've got, I bang on about this, but it's like between 150 to 200 contributors, all kind of pouring their attention and skills into this realm. And then you've got kind of an ecosystem of network partners, relationships that are there to be deployed in service of new partners coming in to, yeah, just help to grow this thing. But so with 5 minutes out, I'm not seeing any requests to ask questions. It's a lot to absorb. I know this is like not your usual DeFi fodder that we've just gone into. It's maybe touching on topics which you don't really hear often in these spaces. But we're going to have more of it. But if questions do come up after the fact, just ping us, and either Nara or myself or one of the other team can kind of riff on Twitter. But where can folks out in the audience, and thank you everyone for listening through for this past hour. Where can people find out more about you if they want to get involved? How do they do that? Is there any kind of call to action you wanna put out there before we start heading off?
Of course, yeah. You can you always go to our Twitter. It's linked in my bio. You can to dive into our white papers, sort of see what our strategic initiatives and sort of processes for execution are. Jump into our Discord. We're always active in there, looking to onboard contributors, looking to speak with folk about ideas. Definitely follow us on Twitter. Turn on your alerts. We do have some exciting announcements coming up very, very soon. And we'd love to have you. And just going through our documentation, you'll find very quickly your respective role within the organization and how you can help us achieve some of our initiatives. So dive in, do as much due diligence as you feel necessary.
Okay. Those who don't know me well may not know I really like ending meetings early. So we're at 3 minutes out. I'm gonna just be quiet for a moment in case there is someone with like a last minute question. But if not, thank you so much, Nah. This has been really each time I talk with you, I learn something new and kind of discover like an extra layer of depth to what was already quite a kind of deep set of analysis and approach. So thank you and team for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for having me too. We really much, very so much enjoy these conversations about, you know, sort of the social impacts of this technology. So, you know, my DMs are open. You have any questions, slide right in. We're willing to talk to anyone about, you know, how we can move forward here.
And on that note, let's put a bow in it. Thanks so much, Na, and thanks everyone for popping along. We'll put up this recording later on if you want to circulate it around. And the next Spaces is on Tuesday, UTC 1830. There's a poster going around which I think says Elemental FI. That's another name for composable finance, who are bringing Olympus Pro over to the Polkadot Kusama ecosystem. So they're much more on the infra ticket. So check that out. And then the one after that, I can't remember, but it will be on Thursday, the other T, 1830 UTC. And we'll be doing this for about 6 weeks. So every Tuesday and Thursday, we'll have a chat with one of the grantees who are part of Amanita. But on that note, catch you later, everyone.
All right. Thanks for having me. Yep.
Appreciate you. Bye. Have a good day.